My name is Jacob, and welcome to another episode of Raw and Uncut on the Abrasive Conversations platform. In this episode, ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to continue the conversation that I started on Sunday. On Sunday, I tried to stream live the open chats conversation and my response to it. I had a show on I had a guest on the show, contributor Danielle Hofmeester, and unfortunately, I was not able to finish the live stream. So I have decided to record an episode, or an uncut episode, to share the complete conversation that me and Danielle have. Now, with that being said, it's all about the colored identity and the racism between colored and black people, because one of the things that transpire was Gayton McKenzie's racist tweets that also serve us. Now, before we go into this particular episode, I personally do not identify as a colored person. However, that doesn't mean that I have not been subjected to the type of violence that was this group subjected to. I identify as Jacob Cloete, but more particular as an indigenous person in South Africa. So I share a complex ancestry with many other indigenous groups in South Africa. So with that being said, the conversation that I want to have sometimes is quite abrasive. So I asked Danielle to help me carefully think through this particular moment between colored and black people. So I gave her a set of questions to respond to. And one of the first questions that I asked her is, what was her take on the Open Chats podcast? And this is what Danielle had to say.
So when I saw the clips, I think it was Monday or Tuesday when the entire thing blew up and went viral. It was one of the first things that I saw pop up on my FYP Monday or Tuesday morning. And I remember feeling an immediate sense of outrage. I was very upset. I was very angry because I took those stereotypes, those derogatory comments that they made, and I personalized it, right? I saw it as an attack on my personhood, on my sense of dignity and the dignity of those I love and my broader community. And I think that was the collective response. I think most people felt outraged and upset, and rightfully so. I want to say here that people's sense of anger is very legitimate. Anger is a very reasonable, rational response to being stereotyped, to being discriminated against, to being dehumanized. I don't want us to be too quick to try and quell the anger and tell people it's not that deep, okay, get over it. Anger is very rational here. And I think it can be a very useful emotion as well. I think we just have to be constructive about how we allow that anger to surface and how we give voice to that anger. I don't want us to try and brush over it. But in my case, I moved very quickly from feeling angry to feeling a sense of apathy and sort of hopelessness and disappointment all rolled into one weird gray emotion, because the words that they spoke were nothing new to me. The utterances, the pathologizing of colored people as mentally ill, as dangerous, as criminal, making a caricature of colored people for comedic fodder, these things, it's not unique. It's not a unique experience in post-apartheid South Africa. I've had wild things said about me and said about my community from other race groups, including black people. So yeah, it didn't feel so surprising, so shocking. But I think there's a real danger that we're not aware of. I don't know. you scroll through comments and there are people who say it's not that deep because other groups are also being stereotyped. By the way, this colored people are not the only victims on this podcast. There are other ethnic groups who are also being discriminated against. Women are being especially discriminated against, as well as the queer community. But this cavalier, casual way of just discriminating against vulnerable groups of people, I think there's something very dangerous in allowing that dehumanization to happen and for us to just be okay with it for laughs. I think it's very dangerous. I think it sets us back in terms of building a country that is socially cohesive, that is inclusive, that is equitable, that is just, all those beautiful, beautiful values that we try to uphold. It sets us back so far. But I also think at the same time it's very necessary. I think it's very good that this came up and this came up so publicly. Because it shows everyone that we still have a very, very long way to go in terms of reaching a society that is more just, a South Africa that is more just, that is more socially cohesive, that is more democratic.
So what comes from Danielle's response is an issue around social cohesion. Now, after listening to our response, it raised a more pertinent question. Was there ever a social cohesive project after the TRC in South Africa, apart from the Springboks and sporting events? I don't think so. I really don't think so that there was a project to bring us closer to this non-racial, non-diverse type of country. We are a complex country with a complex history, with many types of identities. So it's important to think about social cohesion. But when we think about social cohesion, we must also think about the apartheid and the special realities that people like colored and black people and even Indian people in South Africa are facing. So the follow-up question that I had for Danielle was, how do you think we should approach this particular issue? Now, I ask this particular question because she is a dialogue practitioner. She is part of the Institute for Justice and Reconciliation in Cape Town, and they do important, difficult work in marginalized communities with marginalized groups. So she has a lot of experience in facilitating dialogue. So this is what Danielle had to say.
I think that whatever happens is going to require a multi-pronged approach. And I don't think there's any one solution that someone can offer that will remedy the conflict that's arisen this week. I do want to say here that I am a dialogue practitioner. And I work in the field of transitional justice in South Africa on issues of anti-racism and social cohesion and belonging, etc. And I have seen in my work the relevance and the usefulness and the impactfulness of having transparent, inclusive, and sustained dialogues. There is this narrative that is perpetuated, particularly on social media. You see it quite often, that it is government and our political leaders who perpetuate divisions between us, who entrench those divisions. And to an extent, that is fact. And I think we only need to take a look at our political parties and our political leaders. And we'll see that they employ the sort of divide and conquer tactics to ensure support for them. So that is certainly true. That narrative is certainly true, but it is not only government. It is not only our political parties who perpetuate divisions. There are very real interpersonal tensions that exist between different groups in this country. And I think we need to be very honest about those tensions that exist, and we need to name them. We need to, from my perspective, get into a space, all of us, and have authentic, truthful conversations about what issues we have with one another. because it wasn't Gayton McKenzie or some other demagogue who made those derogatory comments against colored people. It was another black man, another black South African. It was an individual, wasn't a political actor. And he was not paid by the government to make those utterances, no matter what conspiracy theorists say. So the open podcast chats have shown us that we have very real issues with one another, and we need to be honest about those issues, and we need to work towards resolving them. We can't resolve anything unless we're willing to acknowledge that there is a problem that exists. So that is one thing I think needs to happen, is we need to have truthful conversations, and we need to sustain those conversations. So we can't get together just once with one another. And I also don't think we should be having these conversations on social media, just by the way. But we can't be getting together just once or twice and chatting about race relations in South Africa. We need to be having these conversations on an ongoing basis. So I think dialogue is very critical in terms of advancing social cohesion between us as South Africans. But I also think, and I don't know how this will play out, but something's got to give with podcasts in South Africa. This Open Chats podcast is not the first problematic show that I've seen pop up on social media. I don't know anything about Machi, but I constantly hear about Machi's podcast, and he said this, and now he's being sued. So having vitriol, podcasters spewing vitriol on their shows is nothing new, and spewing vitriol particularly against marginalized groups of people in this country, especially women and especially queer people. So something's got to give with podcasting shows. I don't know if it needs government regulation. I don't know if that's a way that we want to go necessarily. Do we want to get government involved? What does that mean for freedom of speech and expression? I don't know. Or, yeah, I don't know. Maybe we need to hike up the prices of podcasting mics. Maybe people who do podcasts need to be qualified. I honestly don't know, but something's got to give, because the Open Chats show, it's what those utterances were not an aberration. They were not unique. It's not the first time. We can't keep having these sorts of conflicts arise. We can't keep giving people with really harmful, bigoted views a platform on which to spew their bigotry. So, yeah.
After Gayton McKenzie's initial response, which was to report the Opencast podcast to the Human Rights Commission and open a case of criminal injury, his racist tweets surfaced. Now, what happened at that particular moment, and what I was thinking about, is there a level of hypocrisy in the responses of colored people in this particular moment? And this is a question that I asked Danielle, because I was extremely interested in her take, because I have such a strong take on this issue. So this is Danielle's response.
So is there a level of hypocrisy in colored communities that we're seeing? I think, unfortunately, yes. I don't know if you've seen it, but there was this trend, and I think it's sort of died down now because other colored people have called it out, but there were some colored people who were participating in this trend and perpetuating it as well. And the trend went something like, colored this, colored that, maseg no net, insert anti-black stereotype. And I've seen this tit-for-tat exchange of bigotry unfolding on social media, and it's been incredibly frustrating. Because how are you going to oppose racial discrimination by perpetuating racial discrimination? Logically, this is inconsistent to me. I think as South Africans, we need to decide as individuals, but also as a collective, what kind of South African society do we want to realize for ourselves and for future generations? Do we want a South Africa that is socially cohesive, that is inclusive of all, where people feel they belong, and where people have a real felt sense of dignity? Or do we want a South Africa that is anarchic, that uses marginalized groups of people for comedic fodder, that easily, freely dehumanizes people? Is that the South Africa that we want? Decide, because then that needs to inform how it is that we move forward and how it is that we respond to injustices perpetuated against us. I think we need to be truthful and honest with ourselves. And this national dialogue that's going to be taking place, I think that needs to happen in every single community, but also in every single household. Let us sit down. Let us be authentic and transparent about the issues that very obviously exist in our country and between us as people of different races, of different genders, of different beliefs. Let's be honest about it. And let's see how we can forge together a way that is going to be mutually beneficial. Or beneficial for everyone. I think there is a level of hypocrisy that exists within all racial communities in this country. Coming back to the first point that I made about the utterances of the hosts from the Open Chats podcast not being unique, not being shocking, me having heard those derogatory statements before by other Black people. Coming back to that, those conversations that the Open podcast hosts were having and the derogatory comments that they made against colored people, those did not come up in a vacuum, right? They exist within the Black community as well. And there are Black content creators particularly who have come out and admitted this and said they have heard their own families and their own communities talk in demeaning ways about the color community, in the same way that I have sat around tables with my colored family and listened to them say derogatory things about other Black people. There is a level of hypocrisy that is present in all of our communities. No one here is an absolute victim or an absolute perpetrator. There's a level of culpability in both communities, and I think we need to be honest about that.
So the final question I had for Danielle was with regards to the politicking for this so-called colored vote. In the Western Cape, Northern Cape, and even in the Eastern Cape and other parts of South Africa, political parties like the DA, the Patriotic Alliance, and even the ANC see the colored vote as a monolithic type of support, and that specific colored leaders or specific colored driven politics would change that particular vote. So since the podcast, the Open Podcast debacle broke, we saw a lot of politicking behind the scenes, and openly people were speaking out against, or not people, the political parties voiced their disdain for the comments that the Open Podcast made. And what happened is some parties reported to the Human Rights Commission, so there was an outrage. Now, the question I had for Danielle, what does she make of this? And what are they trying to do? Are they trying to score some political points? And this is what she had to say.
So I think that colored people occupy a very unique historical position in this country. During apartheid, colored people were placed in what you could call the in-between zone, right? So colored people were a kind of a buffer between white people who sat at the apex of the hierarchy and then Black people who were at the very bottom. And you often hear it come up in conversations with other colored people that during apartheid, colored people weren't white enough to benefit, and now during democracy, colored people aren't Black enough to benefit either. There is a sense of non-belonging and of not being acknowledged as belonging as well, that I think perpetuates this feeling of marginalization by colored people. The reality is we have so much in common with Black people. We have both experienced the compounded effects of historical dispossession and of poverty. Both communities are struggling with service delivery. Both communities have schools that are underfunded. Both communities have extremely high levels of violence. There are so many similarities between our communities, and we are marginalized in similar ways. I think the issue comes in again where colored people have experienced a particular kind of trauma that perhaps Black people have not. And that is the trauma of being de-Africanized and of being made to feel, because I do not have an immediate ancestral tie that I can point to that ties me to this land, I don't belong here. And if I feel like I don't belong here, and if I've been de-Africanized, that perhaps leads to feelings of my issues not being important, my issues not being acknowledged, my issues not being treated as urgent. So it's not that one group is suffering more than the others. Both groups are suffering immensely. It's just we're suffering in different ways here and there. And sometimes Black people have to deal with issues that colored people do not have to grapple with, and vice versa. It's not a competition. We are all in it together. We are all marginalized. And I think that's where the attention needs to be, not on who's more marginalized than others, who has it worse, and who deserves more attention. That's not very useful. But understanding that all of our struggles are interconnected with one another. And the only way we're going to remedy our lives and create the society that we want to see is by uniting. Is by paying more attention to what connects us, to what makes us similar to one another, than what makes us so very different.
So, important point that Danielle actually raises, and I want to finish this episode with this, is this in-between zone that the so-called colored people find themselves in. Now, the important question that I have, is this a perceived in-between zone, or is this the legacy and the remnants of apartheid psychology, apartheid spatial planning, the effects of apartheid still with this group of people? Now, are colored people marginalized? Yes. Are Black people marginalized? Yes. There is an open, there is an episode on this particular issue already that I've recorded, this thing between colored and Black people. And I have a set of questions, and I answered a set of questions, so go and have a look of it. So this in-between zone, is the perceived in-between zone, if it's real, where does it come from? How do we address it? Now, my belief on this particular issue, if there's a in-between zone where this group of people find themselves in, the best way for me is to do a deep dive into your complex ancestry. Because you were racially classified as colored, so it erased your indigenous ancestry. So if you, as a colored person in South Africa, start diving into your complex ancestry, then you will see that you have many indigenous roots on the African continent, whether that's in South Africa, Botswana, East Africa, West Africa. Colored people in South Africa is as much African and Black as any other groups of indigenous people in South Africa. And that's the reality that I want them to embrace, this indigenous ancestry and African ancestry on the African continent, because then they will find a sense of belonging, and that will actually take them out of this in-between zone that they currently find themselves in. So there's a lot of work that needs to be done. And this is where my work is situated, and this is where I am going with the conversation. My take is the colored identity is a problematic identity, because there's so many groups of people since 28 that have been classified as colored. That is from enslaved people to other indigenous groups like Xhosa, Tswana. Most indigenous groups in South Africa were classified as colored is one particular point. So this idea that it's a mixed ancestry in many cases is a farce, because there is no such thing as racial purity, and there is no such thing as a racialized pure biological identity. Like I said in a previous episode on Uncut, race-based identities is political, and it has a political purpose. Ladies and gentlemen, this is me and Danielle's take on this particular debacle. And I have sent an open invitation to the Open Chats podcast. I would like to have a conversation with them, and so that we can have a more complex and serious conversation than they normally have. My take on that particular group of people, they are a talented group of young black and indigenous people in South Africa that said the wrong thing, but who haven't said the wrong thing in South Africa. Is this a time to condemn them and cast them to the side? I don't think so. This is an opportunity where we can have more serious conversations about these perceived differences between colored and black people in South Africa. I hope they invite me to the show and to have this conversation. I think it would be a really good conversation. I'll see you guys in the next episode. May God bless. Thank you.